Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Selling Greenville, your favorite real estate podcast here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm your host, Stan McCune, realtor. As you guys should, by this point, already know, here in the upstate of South Carolina. And you can find, as always, all of my contact information in the show notes. If you need to reach me for any reason, that's where you can go if you don't already have my contact information. And as well, just a reminder, as always, if you've listened to this podcast multiple times, or even if this is your first episode and you have gotten something out of the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating. Please leave a short little review that'll only take you a couple of seconds in your podcast app. And as well, make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Jumping right in today, I want to discuss the 10 least helpful questions to ask when looking at purchasing real estate. And I'm mentioning these 10 questions because they are very common questions, or questions I get literally every single week. And let me just cut to the chase here, okay? If it's a question that I haven't already asked, then it's probably not a useful question to ask, if that makes sense. When I see a property, and when I have a client that's interested in a property, I'm already thinking through, okay, what are the potential issues here? What are the potential things that we need to get out in front of? Usually, if my clients are wanting me to ask a question, particularly if it's one of these 10 questions, it's probably not worth asking. Now, that being said, I'm still going to ask it because that's my duty, that's my responsibility for my buyer clients. But that's just something that I just want to say on the front end. And I also want to say on the front end, not to be snooty about this, I never have a problem with people asking questions. I never have a problem with my buyers wanting me to go to the listing agent and to ask, specific questions, even if they fit into one of these top 10 least helpful questions. I never have a problem with that. I get paid to do what my clients want me to do, right? And I do follow the philosophy, for the most part, that the customer, or to use the legal South Carolina terminology, my client, that they are always right. There are times when I will disagree with them, but at the end of the day, it's my responsibility to represent them and their desires. Usually, if we have a disagreement, I have found more often than not, later down the road, my clients come back and say, yeah, you were actually right. And I'm not trying to brag or any of that, but this is what I do for a living, right? So I should be right more often than not. If I'm not, then maybe I should be doing something else. But I don't actually believe that there are dumb questions. So I don't want to pose any of these. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, that's a question I ask all the time, and I must be an idiot. No, I'm not saying that there are dumb questions, and I'm not suggesting that any of these 10 least helpful questions are dumb or, the product of a lack of intelligence or anything like that. But what I am saying is that these questions tend to not yield helpful answers, or, as you'll see multiple times with multiple of these questions, a lot of them are an attempt to shortcut the process. Purchasing real estate is a process, and you cannot shortcut it. That simply can't be done. The process has to play itself out. That is exactly why I have a job as a realtor, is because if it was just really simple and you could just shortcut the process and just go about it, real simply, there wouldn't be a need for real estate professionals. But the fact that there are aspects to this, that there's multiple steps to it, that there's a lot that goes into it, that's exactly what real estate professionals are here for. Okay, so with all of that to be said, let's dive right into the 10, not stupid questions, but the 10 questions that I get the most often, that tend to be the least helpful questions to ask when you're looking to buy real estate. And these are not in any particular order. These are just in the order that I came up with them in my head. Question number 1, why is the seller selling? Oh man, I wish I had a dollar for every time I get this question. Why is the seller selling? In all of my years of real estate, I have never had a seller answer this in a way that either wasn't already obvious or in a way that just didn't really directly answer the question. What do you expect the seller to say? Oh, this property is just garbage. That's why the seller is selling. The property is just garbage. No, they're not going to say that. Can you expect them to say, let's say that they're an investor, they're selling off an investment property. They're not going to say, well, I'm selling this one off because I can do a lot better elsewhere. There's a lot better stuff on the market than this, so I'm dumping this off. No, they're not going to say that. Do you expect them to say, I'm about to foreclose and I'm super motivated and will take the first offer I can get? No, they're not going to say that. And this is what I just alluded to before. This is a shortcut question. Asking why the seller is selling is an attempt to shortcut doing your own research into a property. I would say rather than focusing on why a seller is selling, focus on why you should or shouldn't buy the property. It is your job to do that research. It is not the seller's job to do the research for the buyers. It's not the seller's job to reveal the obvious things or the not obvious things to the buyers, except for material facts about the property itself. The seller does not need to reveal their motives, and they will not. Even if it sounds like they're telling you their motives, they're not telling you everything. Usually sellers have a lot of motives for selling a property, and they're just going to tell you the one that is the least, quote unquote, incriminating to them, the one that sounds the best. So asking the seller or asking the listing agent, why is a seller selling? You're not usually going to get, very rarely. Again, I don't think one time in my career have I gotten a helpful answer from that. So you have to do your own research. And obviously, as a buyer's agent, that's something that I help with. And usually it becomes readily apparent why a seller is selling as you do your research, as you look at the property and all of that kind of stuff. And sometimes it's not apparent. Maybe the seller doesn't know what they're doing. I have seen that. I have seen times where a seller is selling because they don't realize that they're sitting on a gold mine. I had a situation one time a few years ago where a client of mine was looking to purchase a property. The seller had no idea. They underpriced it. They had no idea what it was worth. We gave them an offer, and my client unfortunately backed out. But what ended up happening is in the process of being under contract, they ended up having to do some work to some things that we revealed. And while they were during our inspections, while they were doing work to the property, they got so much interest from people wanting to rent it that they realized, well, my goodness, I'm sitting on a gold mine here. And then that seller ended up, after my client backed out, which they then immediately regretted, and that was something I discouraged them from doing. I didn't think it was a wise decision. They backed out, immediately regretted it, and then the seller decided, I ain't even going to sell this property now. And so that was just an example of a seller selling. They didn't even know what the property was worth. And so, again, not usually a helpful question. All right, question number 2. Is there anything wrong with the house they aren't telling me? Yes, there are things wrong with the house they aren't telling you. There isn't a single house anywhere in the U.S. where the homeowner discloses every single detail that they know that's wrong with the house. The seller's disclosure itself is in South Carolina, it's a 5 to 6 page document. And it's very basic, some of the things that it asks. It's mostly yes/no questions. There's not a whole lot of room in there to fill out everything. Do you think that the seller is going to tell you every single outlet that doesn't work, every single faucet that has low water pressure? Do you think that they're aware of every single thing going on in the crawl space? No. And if they are, odds are that they are not going to list out every single thing. They might not even remember every single thing. That's what I have run into many, many times where clients that are selling a house, they don't disclose everything that is wrong with the house because they forget. They've gotten used to just living with this or that or the other thing. And it just becomes one of those, it's easy to forget. And again, this is a shortcut question. Is there anything wrong with the house they aren't telling me? You can't shortcut this. You have to do your due diligence. Now, that's not to say you should go crazy with your due diligence. An experienced investor, if you're looking at investment properties, doesn't need a ton of due diligence to identify a good deal. But you should do what you need to do to properly assess a deal based on what you're doing, what your criteria is. And for some, I have several investor clients that their assessment of the property, at least their initial assessment, involves just me looking at it, in some cases without even my buyer client available. Because I know, generally speaking, what I'm looking for. Now, again, that's not a shortcut. You still need to do your inspections by and large, but that's just something to keep in mind. There are things wrong with the house that the listing agent isn't telling you or doesn't know, and that the seller isn't telling you or doesn't know. That is always the case. It's not a question that you need to ask. Question number 3, I'm getting this one a lot because this is such a common thing that we're seeing in this market. Why are they selling as is? Let me tell you what a seller isn't going to say in response to this question. They're not going to say, we're selling as is because there's a ton of problems that make it not worth it for you or for me. They're not going to say that. Again, another shortcut question. The vast majority of cases where sellers are selling as is are when, A, there are clear and obvious issues that they don't have the money to address themselves. You can see that very easily. You don't need to ask the seller that question. You can see it usually in the photos, but for sure in person, you can see that. Maybe even the seller's disclosure reveals some of that. B, they never lived in the house, such as, an estate sale or something like that, and don't know what might be wrong with the property, and they just want to dump it off. That's a very common reason why sellers are selling as is. Again, that's very obvious. You can see it usually in the photos. You can see it perhaps on public records. Oftentimes in the listing, it'll say if it's an estate sale or something to that effect. And I still get clients that are like, well, why are they saying that they're selling as is? Because it's an estate sale. People that are selling in an estate sale situation, they don't want to have to go through all these inspections and repairs and all of that. They just want to get under contract for an agreeable price and then just get to closing and not have to worry about fixing all sorts of plumbing and electrical stuff and whatnot. You have to factor that into your price. And again, you have to do your own due diligence to make sure you know what you're getting into before closing. And C, the last reason, and this is right now, I'm recording this in April of 2022, and this is a really common reason why people are selling as is, because they can. Right now, it's such an insane seller's market that a lot of sellers are just saying, you know what, I hate having to deal with repairs and all of that. This house, it's in good condition. I've kept up with it. I've done everything I need to do. I just want to sell it to someone that I know isn't going to nickel and dime me for all these ticky-tack little repairs. And so that we're seeing that very commonly right now. Very commonly, situations where the sellers are not wanting to have to mess around with that, and the house isn't necessarily in bad condition. They are just wanting to not have to deal with going back and forth in a mid transaction negotiation over repairs. Next question. Why don't they answer any questions in the seller's disclosure? What this question is really asking is the seller hiding something, right? I see a lot of this. I mean, most sellers' disclosures, they don't say hardly anything. And again, there is no way to know whether they're hiding something. Most sellers don't take the seller's disclosure very seriously. And as a buyer and a buyer's agent, I don't put a whole lot of stock into the seller's disclosure. I constantly find mistakes in there. I looked at a property recently with some clients of mine. It said on the seller's disclosure, AC unit, 2022, brand new, right? Well, part of what I do as an agent is I always look at the AC unit because you don't know what you're going to find. I went to the AC unit. Guess what year it was? It was a 2004. And they had on the seller's disclosure that it was a 2022 unit. I went back to the listing agent and was like, hey, what's going on here? Why did they disclose it was brand new when, it's like 18 years old? He went back to the seller. The seller is an out-of-state seller. And the out-of-state seller didn't realize that they had hired an AC guy to replace the unit, and he had gone to some like scratch and dent place and had installed an 18-year-old AC unit that I guess was in good shape in his mind, and that was what he used in order to save everyone costs. So you cannot trust a seller's disclosure. And as I already said, there are times when sellers don't even remember. There's no way for a seller to remember every single thing that's wrong with the property. So you can't expect that. You cannot shortcut the process. You have to do all the research yourself. Again, this is a major part of my role, is to make sure that my clients, that my buyer clients actually purchase what they want to purchase, actually get the property that they want to get. All right, next question. Actually, I don't know. Do I have 10 questions here? Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've got 9 questions here. I don't even have 10. Wow. I need to come up with one more on the fly here. I don't think I'm going to do it. All right. Regardless, question number 5. This is for a new listing specifically, okay? Because this can be a good question for a home that's been on the market for a while. But if a home has just come on the market, to ask the question, do you think they have some wiggle room on the price? Okay, again, this is as of April 2022. If you're listening to this 3 years from now, this might be a very different answer that I would give. But right now, in these market conditions, the answer to this question for a new listing is always the same. It's always the word no. Do I think they have wiggle room on the price for a new listing? No. No, I do not. It doesn't matter if they clearly, demonstrably overpriced it. You know how many times I talk to listing agents when they've listed a new house and it's overpriced, and come back to them and discuss with them. I'm just like, this, I might give feedback, or I might talk to them and be like, I'm not really seeing how this fits this price. And they always just come back. I had one that was sassy with me lately. That was just like, if you look at the comps, you'll see that it's not overpriced. And what was ironic about that is that I had looked at the comps and it was overpriced, and that house is still languishing on the market as of today, which only happens in this market if it's overpriced. In a seller's market, it is a complete waste of time to ask if a seller has wiggle room on the price. They do not have wiggle room on the price in their minds. All they are seeing is these prices going crazy, all their neighbors selling their homes in 2 days, and they're just, jacking up the price, and there you go. They're expecting to get that, and it's not until they start to lower the price that reality starts to come in. Now, if a home has been on the market for a week or two, maybe at that point they do have some wiggle room, although less so than in the past. I'm still seeing homes that have been on the market for 1, 2, 3 weeks that go under contract, and it's still a full price contract, just again because of how insane the market is. But even in these situations, it's usually not worth my time to ask the listing agent, does the seller have wiggle room, because realtors are fiduciaries, and there's very limited information that we can give, with regard to whether our clients have wiggle room or not. Just like me as a buyer's agent, if the seller comes to me and it's just like, do you think they can come up on the price? There's only so much that I can say in that situation without completely giving up, what I'm supposed to be doing as a fiduciary for my client. And so the better way to ask the question is not to ask it, it's just to make the offer. And obviously, I prefer my clients talk to me first, like, hey, is this offer even worth it? I'm just going to shoot you straight. And there's a lot of ways that I can assess whether an offer is worth it or not. But at the end of the day, if the seller does have wiggle room, if it's a property that's been on the market for a while, and it might be a candidate for having some wiggle room, the best way to assess that is simply to make an offer. All right. Question number 6. Is the property overpriced? Okay, this is the question, again, that I get a lot. Is this property overpriced? The issue with this question is a lack of precision. We've got to determine what you're really asking. Are you wanting to buy a home with instant equity? I mean, good luck right now. That there was a time when you could do that, and that time will return at some point. It's just not right now. Are you wanting to make sure your appraisal comes back at value, that you don't end up in a situation where you have a low appraisal and then are in the middle of the transaction having to renegotiate things? That can be a good question to ask. And so that's really if that's really what you're asking, just ask it. Don't ask it, is it overpriced? Ask, would this house actually appraise? And even, if you're wanting to buy a house with instant equity, that's fine too. Ask that question. Often a better question to ask, though, than any of these, what a lot of people are asking is they don't want to buy something more than it's worth. But that's subjective in so many ways. Even what appraisers value properties at is very subjective, which I've talked about many times. Better question to ask often, what is this house worth to me? It might be worth less than it's listed for. It might be worth more than it's listed for. But that is the question that you need to ask, and be realistic. Compare that house to the other homes that are on the market and go from there. If that house is a great value compared to everything else you've been seeing on the market, then it might be worth more to you than it would be to someone else. All right, question number 7. Why hasn't this home sold yet? Again, there are certain situations where this question could make sense. If you see a home priced correctly in an area that normally sells quickly and without any discernible issues with it, it's a great question. That at that point it becomes, okay, is this maybe a diamond in the rough here? But 99% of the time, the answer is really simple. It's either A, a house hasn't sold yet because it's overpriced, and or B, the house is in bad condition, easy to see, and or C, it's in an undesirable location. One of those 3 things is the answer 99.9% of the time for a house in a seller's market that isn't selling. That's it. And so, and those are all things that can be identified pretty quickly. And now, if you're not from Greenville and you don't understand the areas and all of that, I completely understand asking this question. That's a great question if you're not from around here, for my out-of-state investors or people moving here from out of state. Great question to ask. But for those of you that live in this market, that understand the different neighborhoods and the school districts and all of that, you can rule out whether it's in an undesirable location or not. And you can pretty quickly identify whether it's overpriced or in bad shape. That said, again, like with all of these questions, I'm happy to entertain them. It's just the answers are usually pretty obvious. And most of the time, I feel like when I get asked that question in particular, usually it's something that just common sense. I don't even need to do any research into it. I can just look at it on my phone and just immediately tell you what the reason is. And probably a lot of my experienced clients could figure that out too without me even needing to do that. But I'm still happy to do it because that's, again, what I get paid for. Question number 8, is this a rough neighborhood? Okay. As a realtor, I simply cannot answer that question. I've actually gotten worse variations of this question. I got a question, is this an all blank with question with fill in the blank was a skin color? Is this an all blank skin color neighborhood? And I just said to the guy, I absolutely cannot answer that question. That is a violation of real estate law in so many ways, but specifically it's steering. That is what it is. Me answering questions about whether a neighborhood is rough or not. Again, I have to be extremely careful with what I say, and those are not good questions to ask. It's also a very subjective question. Are you wanting to know how much crime there is? Well, there are objective ways to look that up. And me as a realtor, my office has told me not to look that up, because that's then becomes something that I can potentially be liable for. So I don't look up any crime statistics, but you can. You can look up registered sex offenders online. You can get crime stats from the sheriff's department, et cetera, et cetera. Do you want to know what percentage of homes in the area have been updated? Well, Google Street View or doing a drive-by is a great way to do this. And you could also, ask me how many, generally speaking, how many homes in this area have been remodeled? What kind of rates are we seeing of people coming in and flipping houses? I can't answer that question to the best of my knowledge. But don't ask me if it's a rough neighborhood. I can't really answer that. Question number 9, which I guess is the question we're going to end at. Why aren't you buying this house? Question that investors will ask me because they know that I invest in real estate. And usually there are 10, 15, 20 reasons why I'm not looking to purchase a property that's available. I'll remind you guys, my primary job is being a realtor, and that's what I spend 90% of my time on. Most people that are realtors and investors primarily focus on the investment side of things and don't do much on the retail real estate side of things. I'm the opposite because I enjoy the retail real estate side of things. So the investments take a distant second place in comparison to my normal real estate business. And my investments are very selective. I only buy a very narrow profile of rental properties. I only flip usually a couple of houses a year typically. And I could make a lot more money if I focus on the investing side of things, but I'm more focused on a lifestyle that I prefer. And flipping houses and all of that, for me, it's very stressful. I don't enjoy it. And so I don't do it as much as perhaps I could. As you can see, I consider a lot more than just the money in all of this. I also factor in the business side of this as well. If I bought every property that had potential for my clients, but bought it for myself, then my clients would just go somewhere else. So I have to keep that in mind too. And there are times when I will present a property to a client that I'm interested in, and when they decide that they want to purchase it, I let them have it rather than me focusing on it because I'm looking at it from a broader picture. So the long story short, for me to buy a property, it has to fit a very specific profile. I have to have money and the time to buy it. I have to have time to focus on it. And it has to be the kind of thing where I don't have any clients that want it more than I do. And that type of thing only happens a few times a year. And I guess I'll throw in one more question just to make it 10 questions, right? Because this is one, it's kind of similar to some of the other questions, but as a buyer, will the seller pay my closing costs? Most often, pretty much all the time in a seller's market, no. Again, if it's a new listing, the seller is not going to pay for the buyer's closing costs. I've seen listings where it says the seller wants the buyer to pay the seller's closing costs. I have seen that multiple times the past year. At some point, this will flip, right? At some point, the market will correct, and it will become more of the norm like it was 5 years ago for sellers to pay for some of the buyer's closing costs. But right now, the way things are, sellers are not paying for any buyer closing costs. Each party has to pay their own closing costs, and that's something I can give you an idea of what your closing costs will be depending on the deal that we're looking at. So there you go. I gave you the 10th question to make it so that I can say that I asked and answered 10 questions on here. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. All of my contact information is in the show notes if you need to reach me for any reason. That is where you can go. Please subscribe, rate, review, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the week.